The Metroid franchise has always been a favorite of mine, including both the 2D and 3D titles. This is in large part because of the isolation and atmosphere that each game provides. So I had this script finished, and then we saw actual gameplay footage, so I had to make some changes. The reception of the recent trailer for Metroid Prime 4 has been fairly mixed, and understandably so. It quite simply was not too captivating, at least not if Nintendo wants Metroid to grow beyond its current base. I for one enjoyed it, and think it's clearly all from one area early on in the game, which the new gameplay essentially confirms. So I'm expecting them to market better closer to launch, ideally with an engaging trailer like Tears of the Kingdom had. To my surprise, I even saw a lot of comments comparing it to Halo, and as a lifelong Halo and Metroid fan, I've never even considered comparing the two, as they're incredibly dissimilar in gameplay, story, and structure. The only valid comparison that comes to mind is that the protagonists are superhumans that kill aliens on different planets. So in making this video, I want to share some things that I personally want to see, as well as some variables that I believe could make it more desirable to a new fan base. I want the game to be successful, because then Nintendo may begin giving the same attention to Metroid as they do for Zelda and Mario. So, here are 5 things I hope to see in Metroid Prime 4. I honestly don't really take issue with the current combat structure of the Prime games. The lock-on system and strafing is satisfying to me. However, a lot in the gaming world has changed since 2008, and Nintendo displayed how much they could develop the gameplay of their 2D Metroid games with Dread. I'm hoping we see something similar with the 4th installment, while also staying true to the Prime series. These titles are not meant to play like Doom or Halo. I actually recently tried Doom Eternal for the first time and had a lot of fun, but there's no reason for Metroid to play so quickly. I do think the speed of the game could be increased a bit, and instead of focusing on new weapons, enemies could have very specific weak points that play more like a puzzle. While this is almost always the case with the bosses, I'm referring to the enemies. It's already been done with the beam switches in Metroid Prime and the shield grabs in Prime 3. I believe this should be emphasized. Rather than enemies acting as bullet sponges, which I felt a lot of during Prime 2, it would be more engaging for them to carry weak points, such as shooting the head or the leg while maintaining weapon-specific damaging. I don't think this is something detrimental to the game, but there's no denying that the Prime entries can be at times repetitious with the combat. Like, imagine you're fighting a space pirate and he's invulnerable to all of your attacks, so you have to get behind him to take out the armor. It might seem like a petty request, but I do think this would make for some satisfying combat scenarios. From the second trailer and gameplay for Prime 4, I'm not seeing any significant changes to the overall combat, but it's early, so I'll withhold my judgment. However, with the introduction of Sylix, I'm thinking we may see an increased emphasis on the story. Personally, the story in the franchise has never been that important to me, and the only reason I know what's going on is from YouTube videos and the Metroid Wiki. I get these random urges to just get lost in the lore for no specific reason. So again, the story variable is less for me, but more for those who might be new to the series. The Prime games have always been about isolation and exploration. You're incentivized to discover the lore on your own through scanning. Prime 3 was the exception to this rule, while Dread and Fusion also took a more direct approach. I believe it's very possible to have a functional story while maintaining that organic world building. I would have no complaints about seeing some flashbacks of Samus or about the world she's exploring. As we all know, usually when Samus is on a planet, there's been some type of destruction in the past, and it's her job to either cleanse it or just blow it up. After watching the opening segment of the game, I can definitely say I'd like to see more scenes like that, but I'm guessing once Samus is on her own, they'll scale it back. I think a balance here would be the correct approach. However, I would definitely like to see more horror elements return to the 3D games. Prime 1 was truly complete isolation, and Prime 2 carried some genuine horror with the Dark Ether and the enemies, while Prime 3 deviated from this path. Just using the franchise's most recent example, Dread was not scary per se, but the enemy really created some heart-pounding sequences and even some jump scares. I obviously don't want a horror game, but I would love to see the return of more frightening enemies while feeling truly alone. Give me some environments reminiscent to Prime 2, or even non-combative scenes like with the SAX or the ME. I think these are great beats for Nintendo to hit within the franchise. I don't have too much to say here, as it kinda leads to my next point of really emphasizing the isolation. Something that makes Metroid is simply being dropped on an alien planet without much context and just kind of figuring it out for yourself. This is more of a personal one for me. Most Metroid games are like this, albeit Dread, Fusion, and Prime 3 hold your hand a bit more. Even though that is probably the correct approach when trying to capture a new audience, I would like to see Prime 4 play more similar to the original. Prime 1 is probably the only 3D game that is genuinely structured like a Metroidvania. That and maybe Dark Souls. I see some speak on how Fallen Order or the Arkham games are like this, but I respectfully disagree. I never found myself getting lost or truly having to keep track of my surroundings, always noting areas that I would have to return to. I think this is when Metroid is at its best, and the two titles in the franchise that I would say are the most renowned follow this formula, Prime and Super Metroid. With Prime 4, we now know that Samus accidentally finds herself on Viros following the confrontation with Sylix. What we don't know is if the rest of the game is on this planet, or if we'll be teleporting to new worlds. Prime 2 had the alternate dimension, which worked great in my opinion. However, there was just something about exploring the interconnected world of Prime 1 that was so enjoyable but also mysterious. The exploration felt very organic and challenging in my opinion. You weren't given markers and just had to find the next best path yourself. So, in the perfect world, we'd stay on one planet and explore all the various biomes, but something is telling me that this will not be the case. I just hope the different areas don't feel as disjointed as in Prime 3. Also, for those who hate getting lost, I think a simple solution is to just have an optional hint system, then everyone's happy. Finally, and something that I genuinely want to see, and that could be very important to the success of this new title, is for it to carry some memorable boss fights and characters. The Metroid franchise really only has a few notable figures: Samus, Adam, Mother Brain, Dark Samus, Ridley, and now Ravenbeak, and almost none of these have had any characterization during the games, except for the attempt in Other M. While I don't believe it's necessary for a Metroid game, I think it would be interesting to give Sylix some personality, and maybe display how he and Samus are rivals. I think Dread did a great job characterizing Samus without going overboard. You could feel her anger with Ravenbeak, and I think this is the best approach to Samus. But outside of Ravenbeak, none of her villains have had like any personality. Ridley's supposed to be a leader of the space pirates and incredibly intelligent, but he's only presented as a space dragon that we have to fight. I personally was never a fan of Dark Samus. I think she did great as a villain, but the concept is pretty dull in my opinion. So I think Sylix is a great opportunity to provide Samus with the villain she's always needed. Maybe one that appears more than once or twice throughout the game, a sort of looming threat with his own cutscenes. Xant from Twilight Princess is one of my favorite examples of this. When he was on screen, you could just feel his presence and he never overstayed his welcome. To further this thought, however, I do want to speak a bit on boss fights. Metroid has always been known for its colossal alien bosses, so I'm sure we'll see the fourth entry continue this trend. But I think we need to see an uptick in the challenge and efficiency of the Prime bosses. I don't recall struggling with any of Prime 1's, but Prime 2 did have some difficult ones. Prime 3, however, I found to also be fairly easy, and to take way too long to complete. Fighting Helios, for example, was not challenging, just time consuming. Judging by the boss presented in the gameplay video, I think we may see an increased challenge. That was probably one of the most complex tutorial bosses I've ever seen from the Prime games. The combat and boss attack patterns need to be tightened up and faster paced in my opinion, and I'm hoping that Prime 4 succeeds at this. I honestly struggled coming up with this list because I simply love the Prime games, and I don't need much to change for me to enjoy it. Typically, the atmosphere, music, and exploration is enough to sell me with this series. But as I said, I want this game to be successful, and unfortunately it might not if they don't adjust certain variables or the playstyle. Also, before I close out this video, I saw a comment that made a fantastic point about the silly door phrase they had in the trailer. Previously, the beam-gated doors act as loading hubs for the next area, and although the Switch hardware is not great, it's a significant improvement from the Wii Wii, so they're not limited by this anymore. Point being, I think that comment was an indicator that we'll be solving puzzles to open a lot of doors. Granted, not a great marketing strategy. Regardless, let me know your thoughts on the trailer and what do you want to see from Prime 4. So, until next time.